if I have a good game, like 1,200 damage. So I'm going to tell a few stories about Howard Stern. I've got a bunch of stories about Howard Stern, and I'm talking about my personal experience. Um, so going back to the early 90s, I used to live in Long Island. And I had a friend who was a big fan of Howard Stern's, and he always wanted to be on the show. And I got one of his friends on the show. I literally had to drive him to the studio. So I'll tell the story about driving him to the studio. It was the day of my final exams for my college, and it was the winter time. And I had an old car, and it had trouble starting. There was something wrong with the starter. And in order to get to the show, I had to leave really early, like 5 a.m. And we had to, and I really didn't know New York City that well. So I had to drive my friend who's blind to meet another guy who is paralyzed. And the paralyzed guy lives in New York City. And the blind guy lived in Florida. So I didn't really know my way around New York, but it's easy to find streets. So we found the paralyzed guy's apartment. He had a pet iguana. So when you go in, it was really hot in his apartment, right? And there was an iguana there, and it's like a jungle walking in his apartment. It's like a jungle. And they like moist places, so I remember it being really wet-like. I have a lot of iguana stories, too. So then we get those guys, and back then, anybody could go on the Howard Stern show. You just had to wait in line. And what he would do is he would say, okay, let's get somebody on the show, and they would go to the people that are waiting in line and invite a couple people on. And maybe 4 or 5 people would get on the show. So I drove them to the studio, and I had to go do my final exam, so I had to leave. I said, hope you guys are going to be okay. I'll come pick you up later. And they get out of the car, and then my car won't start. And I'm stuck in New York City, got to do the final. I'm 2 hours away from my final from my school, 2-hour drive in the winter. And I call AAA, and they say, we'll come in 3 days to help you. And I was like, no, I need it right now. And they said, there's too many vehicles that are stuck. You've got to wait 3 days. So I got the hammer out, and I was like, cross your fingers. And I was banging on that starter with the hammer. And eventually, out of a stroke of luck, it took a long time to get it started. I was really worried. I was like, this vehicle's never going to start again. Eventually, I got it started. And like I said, it took like a half an hour delay. So I'm not going to get the gun mark in this game, am I? So I got it started, and I went back to the campus. I was living off campus at the time. And this is another funny story. So I went back, and it was a philosophy class. And the teacher, I was like an hour late, teacher gave me this super mean look. And luckily, because it was a philosophy class, I had to write an essay about something really open-ended. And I wrote it about how my teacher gave me this mean look, and he doesn't understand everything I went through that morning. It was basically about prejudging people. And I showed him how my arms were all covered with soot or grease from lying on the ground under the car. And I basically told the whole story about how I drove my friend to be on the Stern show. The car wouldn't start. The teacher gave me a mean look. The last thing I said was like, and the last thing that happened, I showed up to the final exam an hour late. The teacher gave me a mean look. And now I'm here sitting writing this paper or something like that. And I remember that my paper really had nothing to do with whatever the topic was. I really had to stretch it to make it fit. But I must have passed. I was a philosophy major in college, along with applied math and statistics, but originally it was philosophy because I didn't know any better. I didn't know that you actually had to do something that would get you a job. You know, I thought you just do something that you like, which you don't want to do if you're a student. So that is one of my Howard Stern stories. Another one was, like I said, my friend loved the show. Oh, I didn't tell the good part. So the paralyzed guy got on the show, but my friend, the blind guy, did not get on the show. So they brought the paralyzed guy on. Howard was really excited. So if you see a story on the Stern Show from around 95 or 96 where Howard is really excited about a paralyzed guy, that's the one. And the reason why is because he has a disorder called priapism. And whenever we would ask him, he would say, "What is it called?" Priapism. Could you say that again? Priapism. Like he would say it like it's so he really enjoyed telling us that he had priapism. Well, priapism is a disorder where you have a permanent part of your body stiff. We'll just leave it at that. And only men can get it. So that's why Howard was excited to have him on the show. I don't remember the guy's name, but he was like a musician. He was like a drummer in a band or something. And he was one of those guys that in New York City, there's people that they always wear black and maybe they have tattoos and they're not goth. They're like if we were in the suburbs, a biker might dress like that, but in the city, it's the CBGB guys. They're not goth. They're punk. That's what he was. He was a little punk. Maybe he was in a punk band. I used to live near CBGB. I was like a block away from CBGB, so I used to go to CBGB. I used to drive near CBGB all the time. We might have gone that with no, it wouldn't have been then, but we went another time. So the priapism guy got on the show. My friend Mike, the blind guy, he was on over the phone at some point later. And Howard knew who he was because he was famous. He was in the Guinness Book of World Records. He was a skateboarder before he was blind, by the way. And he was famous for a bunch of other things. He was a wrestler. He was a blind wrestler. He was a surfer. He got blinded in a car accident. Drove under a truck. And at that point, I realized, all of my friends are handicapped. Something that I had realized at the time. $63.8. It actually went up, I think. Mediocre game.